Hi there. Welcome back to the Real Film Chronicles podcast. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And in this week's very special episode, we're going to be taking a look at a little film called Godzilla Minus One.
Very special indeed. This was like an unexpected little nugget of a movie to come out after what seems like a resurgence in Godzilla movies in North America.
Yeah.
Right? We've been blasted with is it 4 movies in the MonsterVerse now that started in 2014?
Godzilla, directed by Gareth Edwards. Then you had Godzilla King of the Monsters. You had Kong Skull Island.
Yeah.
Then Godzilla versus Kong. And then now we're having Godzilla X Kong. Coming out.
In March, I think. In a couple
March
months.
2024. That's coming out. So yeah, we've there's been quite a few Godzilla movies in recent years trying to build out their quote-unquote monsterverse.
Yeah, and that's the American side of it. The Japanese side has seen significantly less Godzilla movies over the years. I shouldn't say the years, over recent history, because there are over 30 Japanese Godzilla movies that have hit the market since the debut in 1954 in Japan. This is one of the confusing things with a lot of Godzilla movies, is that they release in Japan and then we get like an Americanized version of it a year later. And notoriously, like the first Godzilla is like that, where they add in a whole new storyline to the movie with an American actor, kind of like interject into the film and cut out parts of the original film, replace it with this. And then you have like a Godzilla American version 1955, but the Japanese original is 1954. And that happens repeatedly, until recently. Shin Godzilla came out here a little while ago. What was that, like
2016, I think, right?
2016, and that one saw a small theatrical run here. I didn't see it in theaters, but I saw it was listed here for like a week maybe. And now Godzilla Minus One, the latest one from Japan, saw a pretty sizable North American theatrical release. I think it was in like 2,000 screens, and I think I just saw that scene in an expansion because it's doing so well. It's getting more theaters, more showtimes added. But Godzilla is he's a big monster, but he's a big topic is what I was thinking. It was just like, he's a big deal, right?
Oh, he's big.
And I know you and I talked about maybe doing the American Godzilla movies. I think with that Godzilla versus Kong, but we never really got around to it. But before we get into Minus One, like what is your history with Godzilla? Like, are you a fan of Godzilla in general?
Yeah, I think just for the record here, I think Brian's our resident Godzilla expert, but Godzilla was one of those, like you said, he was so big, it was his brand name, it was ubiquitous in pop culture by the time we were born, and so I grew up like, obviously there are references to Godzilla in like movies and TV shows. When we were young, we would go to video rental stores and the library and either rent or borrow. We would just like look at random Godzilla movies if we were bored on a Saturday afternoon. So I saw stuff, just random ones like Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. Like I saw whatever the one is, it Godzilla versus Mothra specifically. There was one where it was like Mothra in there, I think. Saw a couple, and then really it ramped up like was it 1998 or 1999 when Roland Emmerich released that Godzilla movie? Yeah. Which at the time, I don't know. I think people are reevaluating it now. As a kid, it didn't really capture my attention. It was a big tentpole movie, but wasn't huge. So it was really, I kind of got hooked, or I kind of got introduced to Godzilla, like really watching Godzilla in the modern age with, that 2014 version. And then really, like the one that really kind of blew me away was Shin Godzilla. Shin Godzilla I watched and I was like, okay, so this is what a Godzilla movie could be. Not to discount, I haven't seen, this might be sacrilege, I haven't seen the original yet. I haven't seen like a lot of those 30 movies you were talking about. I'm not going to say there's a place for like the kind of B movie, kind of schlocky Godzilla. I think that's one of the abilities of, or one of the reasons why Godzilla has lasted this long is because, Toho Studio, the production company that produced the first movie. I think they still hold the rights to all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But they've constantly invented and reinvented Godzilla in multiple iterations, and that's why, like the American versions right now, like all the ones we discussed, Godzilla and Godzilla versus Kong, they're fun little popcorn movies. They don't really have too much to say, and that's fine. But then there's also, you have the Godzilla, like Shin Godzilla and Godzilla Minus One, that are steeped in kind of social context and social commentary, and are just great films in their own right, and that's great too. So you have the whole spectrum from schlock to, Academy Award winning potential movies, and it's you can take your pick. You can take your flavor of King Kong, not King Kong. You can take your flavor of King Kong, but you can also take your flavor of Godzilla. And so that's kind of been my journey so far. I'm hoping to go back and start maybe in my 2024 project will be to go back and watch all the Godzilla movies, from A to Z. But how about you, Brian? What's your journey with Godzilla? I know he was a lot more part of your, it's like kind of seminal in your film journey, right?
Yeah, and I think it was a lot of recording Godzilla movies off of TV. We had a bunch of beta VHS laid around, and like just watching this, especially with my dad, it was just a lot of Godzilla movies, and it was kind of funny. Like when you watch them like that, this is back in the 80s and 90s. It's like you don't necessarily remember which Godzilla movies you're watching. And when I mentioned that some of them were like the Americanized version, like they're different cuts of the movie. And when you say like, oh, Mothra was in this one, it's like Mothra was in a lot of Godzilla movies. And a lot of the monsters are recurring. And I mean, I always loved them, but like Godzilla and all these movies, but I never had a handle of what ones I'd actually seen or not, except for Godzilla 1984, which I think is just called Godzilla in the US version is from 1985, which was actually a reboot of the entire series.
Okay.
For like the modern time at the 80s. So that's really what I jumped into it. And I think that's mostly what I saw because they were pretty prolific on the rental shelves. But recently, in the past 2 years, like I bought that Godzilla Criterion box set. It has 15 movies, which are sort of like that original 15 run up until that reboot in the 80s. So that's from 1954 through to like the mid 70s.
Is that a specific era? Because I know they have them broken up into different like eras almost based on, I don't know if it was like directors or studios or something or how that worked.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't know about the naming. I think they're actually like significant to like Japanese culture at the time. But I'm just going to pull up the number here because you have, I think it's starting out with the Showa era, which is what the Criterion box set collects. And then you move on to the Heisei era. That was in the 80s into the mid 90s. Then you get into the Millennium era, which I think started with Godzilla 2000.
That was a Japanese release as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that one, I think you and I and one of our roommates at the time watched that in like 2001 and 2002 or so. It was on DVD or not Blu-ray yet, but I think we had the DVD of it.
Oh, really?
One of the few titles that like came out. I think it was called, or maybe I think of another one, Godzilla Final Wars. There's so many of them that it's easy to confuse them all together. But Godzilla over the past couple of years, I did go through every single Godzilla movie in chronological order, starting with that Criterion box set, obtaining the original Japanese cuts of all the movies, watching all those, and then taking it a step further and watching a lot of Japanese sci-fi movies that are sort of in the Godzilla universe. There's a good list on Letterboxd, and I'll try and remember to link it in the show notes. It's called the Godzilla and Friends Marathon. It's composed of 46 films, and there's a lot of other monsters like Rodan and Mothra had their own movies before they showed up in the Godzilla films, right? Oh,
so it was like a multiverse before multiverses were a thing. So in your Monsterverse is Gamera? Is that like, does that show up then?
Gamera is a different company.
Completely
it's
different
not Toho.
Beast at all. Okay.
And I think there's 15 Gamera movies or maybe 12. And they're all kind of split into those same kind of different eras.
Okay.
Like there's a Heisei, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. My apologies, the Showa era. But there's so much to get into there with Godzilla. Like it starts out serious, and then they turn into like kind of campy movies where Godzilla is kind of like a cheeky hero of the films, and he has lots of villains. Yeah, there's a different genre for everybody. They introduce space aliens Like a lot of the monsters come from space. They're regularly traveling
Yeah, I was gonna say.
in and out of our Milky Way and stuff. Like it's bananas. And all the other sci-fi movies that surround it sort of talk more about the aliens, because aliens might show up in one Godzilla movie, and there's actually a movie where they're explored more. So there might be some of their origin and stuff. But there's a lot of Godzilla, and it was a lot of fun going through the entire thing. And now is like the time to do it. Obviously, that Criterion box set is like the good starting point, but we're getting so much Godzilla right now. It's like a Godzilla renaissance of sorts, because Toho stopped making Godzilla movies for a while.
The Godzilla
And one of the rumors was that the American Godzilla movie from '98 was so bad, so ill received, that they're like, Toho was like, we can't let that be one of the last Godzilla movies to come out. Like, we need to start up another series here and start doing it like quote unquote properly, which may or may not just involve Godzilla is like a dude in a suit, right? It's just like that's one of the mainstays of the series.
Yeah. Before I ask this next question, I just want to make it clear we're not sponsored by Criterion at all.
No.
In that Criterion box set, do they have the different versions for our physical media lovers who listen to the show? Does that Criterion box set with the 15 movies from the Soho era, was it Soho or
The Showa
era? Sorry, Soho. That's a different era. The Showa era. Does it have both the Japanese and American versions then? For example, the original.
No, it only has the Japanese ones, except for King Kong versus Godzilla.
Okay.
And the American version is treated like a bonus feature. So it's actually movie number 16 stuffed away on one of the bonus discs in the set.
Okay.
I know all the Japanese and American ones, a lot of the Blu-rays that have come out have both versions of them. But that might be the next project, exploring the Americanized Godzilla films.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to watch them, like, because that's what I'd want to do. I want to watch like kind of back to back, like the original and and the American version, just to like compare those differences with like kind of when it's fresh in your mind. Be a really interesting film project for those of you out there looking for such projects to complete.
And who does that? I mean, that's a fun weekly thing to do. That's basically what I did. Every Thursday night for me became a Godzilla or Japanese sci-fi, alien, some other monster movie in the Godzilla universe. It was a lot of fun. It was something to look forward to every week. Not that there's not other things, but that was like, that's the routine. Shin Godzilla was like pretty wild. It was a pretty wild film. We weren't sure if we were going to get a follow-up to that movie, and instead we got Godzilla Minus One, which is kind of a prequel. It's like, it is truly a relaunch of the Godzilla thing, because even like that 1985 or 84 version, it still felt a little wishy-washy in that it was a reboot of the whole thing. It's like they still seem like they could fit that original 1954 Godzilla into like the canon of the events, right? Where it's like a probably not a good comparison of like the Halloween movies, because they've been rebooted so many times you don't know which ones are part of the overall story or not. Where it's just like Godzilla, that first movie is always part of the story. It's just like those events have always happened, as far as I can remember.
They've always happened, and they always will happen.
Yeah. And then Godzilla Minus One, bam, it's just like, here we go. We're starting completely fresh.
Blank slate, yeah.
And before we get into the movie here, just a reminder, we'll talk about spoilers right from the beginning. So if you haven't seen the movie, go check it out. You got to go see this in the theater. What was your first impression of Minus One?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to expect. I was riding high from like Shin Godzilla, like I said. Like, I really, really love that movie. It was obviously, I love it when they use Godzilla as like a metaphor for, something else. In that case, it was the Fukushima disaster in Japan. It was an obvious kind of metaphor. And so when it was, for me, it was like, it helped to ground it so I could appreciate the movie and this giant dinosaur lizard monster. I was like, but you put it in a social context and all of a sudden it becomes more engaging. I actually care about the human characters involved and that kind of thing.
Yeah. It was quite a commentary on like the government, like a lot of the
bureaucracies and kind of their response or lack thereof to the emergency situation.
Phenomenal movie. Really should be checking out.
Shin Godzilla. So when I watched this one, I was maybe, because I'd seen the trailers and I was a little bit confused because I thought there was gonna be like a time jump. So like when the main gentleman, I can't remember the dude's name, the pilot there, the kamikaze pilot. He's going through and he has this kind of found family where he runs into this after the war. He goes home and he, finds this, has a chance to encounter this woman who was kind of like adopted this baby after her mother died. I thought I was going to jump ahead because in the trailers, I didn't really pick up on the fact that it was like the 1940s still in that.
Oh yeah.
In that, so I was like, I was a little bit. It was weird because I was waiting for the time jump, but they're spending so much time building up these characters. Like, okay, we're staying with these characters, but overall, I'll say that I don't know if this isn't on your top 10 list for 2023 films, then you're doing something wrong. It was just. It was great. Like, this is what, like, normally one of my complaints on watching like a Godzilla film or King Kong film is I don't care about the human characters. Put the monsters back on screen. Like, these characters are boring. They're ineffective. And this movie, I felt like, oh, if you just got rid of Godzilla, this is the first Godzilla movie I was watching where it's like, I don't want more Godzilla. I want to spend more time with these characters to figure out, because like even just the drama itself of these characters in Japan dealing with the fallout, both literally and figuratively, of World War II, this found family coming together and building their life back. Like, that to me, like, that was, if the entire movie was just that would have been good. Plus, on top of that,
legitimately, yeah,
you get some of the most amazing, Godzilla action set pieces in since 2016. So the last 9 years, 8 years, I don't know, but and like, it was phenomenal from start to finish. I was really, really blown away. I was, the action, the drama, the emotion, like I was tearing up near the end a couple points, even at a Godzilla movie.
Yeah.
And just like, and it was also like, it was the first time he had his, like, they kept calling it, I think, heat ray, but it's like a classic atomic breath. Yeah. And it was incredible to watch visually and listen to the sound design. But it was the first time like, oh, this felt like, because he shoots the blast out and it's almost like an atomic blast. You see like the mushroom cloud. Yeah. It's so powerful. It damages Godzilla himself. In the movie, he regenerates. He has this regenerative power, but like, it evoked images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So like, obviously in the context, but just like anytime like you have imagery of any kind of atomic blast or nuclear blast, like that is, it's unsettling to watch that, right? And I think elements like the black rain is like, that's based on historical context, where the ash in the atmosphere gets, mixed in with the rain coming down. And that was just like, it really gave the Godzilla a sense of power. And it was also like, it was this weird mix of like, oh yeah, excitement, and then the horror afterwards of watching this imagery that evoked, very obviously evoked the imagery of like an atomic blast or nuclear blast. And it was like this mix of excitement and drama and horror. And it just worked so incredibly well. And then the scientist, the one scientist guy, his hair was amazing. I don't know. I feel the need to mention this because like every time he was on screen, it was almost like some of them, it was like almost like anime characters, but like his hair was just amazing. There's something for everybody in this. What was your first reaction, Brad? Sorry, I'm going on too long. Like, I obviously love the movie, but what was your reaction, first impressions of Godzilla Minus One?
Yeah, I mean, I was just completely blown away. Like, it was just, it was amazing. You go in to a movie like that, you're not really sure what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And it's been, well, since Shin Godzilla, before we got another Japanese film, and then 2004, before that, was like the last Godzilla movie from Japan. And Shin Godzilla was like, it was nothing short of a masterpiece itself. And one of the things I was heading into this movie was thinking, I hope there's not as much dialogue in this movie, because like, I'm not opposed, like, I have no problems with subtitles.
Yeah. But
Shin Godzilla, there's so much, it was all about bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And all these like boardroom meetings and all these, like, there's tons of characters. It was exhausting to read through that entire film. Like, there's so much going on. It's packed and it's amazing. And that's like, oh man, I hope there's not as much here. And there wasn't, but like what we got was so damn good. Like, those characters were just amazing. It was like the cowardly failed kamikaze pilot, finding redemption in the end, and like watching his struggles go through. Like you said, if you took away all the Godzilla stuff, coming home to, and I can't remember the town he's part of, but it wasn't like it was blown apart by different air raids and stuff. So it's this crushed society, and he's got to make do. And immediately his neighbor is just like, you're alive? Like, seriously? You're a disgrace, right? And it's like this guy feels that tremendous amount of shame for not flying his plane into the side of an aircraft carrier or the enemy target. Because at that time, I think it was just like, well, why should I die when like the war is basically wrapped up?
It was near the end of the war, and it was, by that point it was clear that the Allies were winning, and so from his point of view, like why throw my life away on a lost cause already, right? But then there's also that idea of serving kind of king and country, and like serving your fellow citizens, and he had a job to do, and he clearly, whether or not you agree morally with kamikaze pilots or the use of kamikaze pilots, he had a specific job to do that in his mind he didn't fulfill, right? So dealing with that personal fallout, and
he's dealing with that survivor's guilt throughout the whole thing. It's kind of like very randomly like comes into contact with that woman and this baby. And they just sort of become a family because all these people have been orphaned. The baby's orphaned. The woman has lost her family. He's lost his family. They just come together. And when he gets the job of like going out into the seas to like find these, all
the mines
that are just out there, they talk about like the thousands of mines laid by both sides. And it was just like they go out in a wooden boat so as not to attract the magnetic mines to their boat. They don't tag them or anything. They just shoot at them to blow them up. And you're like, that would be an interesting movie itself. And he comes home, he's dealing with rebuilding their lives, and a bit of time passes in between. It was just so good. If you throw in Godzilla in there, and my God, it's just like the helplessness of it all. The movie is named Minus One, which immediately you're thinking is just like, oh, this is a prequel to the first Godzilla, right? And I guess it's named Minus One because the 2 atomic bombs dropped on them in World War II basically brought their society to zero. And then Godzilla coming in and further, like, the imagery quite clear of like his atomic breath in this are like nuclear bombs going off again and again. And that brings their society to a minus level. Like they are going backwards now.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I was wondering kind of why. I obviously didn't do any research into the title, but I was always thinking like T-1, where it's like, oh, it's the countdown to like a launch or nuclear launch. It was like, I thought that was kind of what they were evoking as well.
Talking about like the government again, sort of being inept. They don't really want to help. I didn't look into this part because I think after World War II, they were not allowed to build up their military again for a certain period of time. And it was like, they had to hand over a lot of their assets and stuff. So I think in this one, that's brought out where it's just like, okay, well, we have this credible threat, and the Americans are now kind of like beginning their Cold War with Russia, so they don't want to lend any help as well. And they build like that civilian military of like these people who just came back from war and asking them to go do more war with the giant, seemingly unstoppable monster. It's just like, it was a big ask. And I think there's a lot of emotional weight behind that. And even though one of those last scenes plays out a little cheesy, where it's like they got these 2 warships and they're trying to drag Godzilla up to the surface to like decompress him. And all the tugboats come out, and it's just like all the other civilians that didn't like necessarily make the cut, but they want to help out, and like sort of led by the guy who was too young to go to war. And he doesn't realize the horrors of war and stuff too. It's just like, love that character, throwing him in there. He still wants to help out, not necessarily his country, but like his fellow people, because like his scientists and his captain friend and his new pilot buddy, it's quite the group.
Yes.
I don't know. There's so much good stuff going on here.
It's the moment that moment of the community coming together that Rise of Skywalker tried to do. Like they actually did it well here. But yeah, I just wanted to go back and touch on the point of like having at the end, it was the civilians who banded together to fight off Godzilla successfully, as opposed to the Japanese government. I think there was like twofold reason. One was like the meta reason, where from a storytelling standpoint, they didn't want to, obviously filmmakers now looking back, they didn't want to give the Japanese imperial government at the time a win, whether, in this fictional version is like, oh, and that would kind of justify, the atrocities that they had committed or the decisions they had made. So it was important for that it was civilians banding together and not the Japanese imperial government at the time. But in the context of the movie, like you had said, they have found a reason that made sense. It's like, okay, like after the war, as we know now, U.S. and Soviet Union tensions were growing that would eventually evolve into the Cold War proper. And so they didn't want to, the Japanese government specifically didn't want to start officially making any kind of military maneuvers that would raise that tension. And so they kind of surreptitiously told them, like, through the civilian channels, there was like the retired general guy there and the one doctor with the great hair who was on the boat with the main character. Turned out he was like a top military advisor. So they were like, okay, we have to raise this, civilian force to fight. The Japanese government says, okay, we have some resources in terms of like boats and technology that you can have access to, but we can't officially, get involved in fighting off Godzilla, even though he's coming directly at Tokyo as part of his new territory. Yeah. So it was like really interesting it was really perfectly merged how like, that meta concern of, not justifying or not giving the Japanese imperial government of the 1940s a win merged perfectly with, they were able to give it an in-universe contextual reason why they wouldn't, launch their entire fleet. So that you end up with like 3 or 4 boats and then one prototype fighter plane, which that prototype fighter plane, like that was really cool. They obviously went in and designed that like let's have like that, just like a immediately recognizable profile. So it was like this iconic design, so you could see that and look at it in the movie. Like you think about, let's go back to Star Wars, like Millennium Falcon or X-Wing fighters or something like that. Like this was like their X-Wing. It was like, okay, they kept making the comment, oh, it's got the tail wings, but I didn't realize until it flew out, it's like, oh yeah, the wings are kind of further back on the craft. It gave it this really cool kind of unique profile. It's like, oh, this is really everything in the movie was just really well thought out that way, from the story elements to the production design. It was all great all the way through.
Yeah, that plane was killer. They were basically saying they had no more airplanes. They'd all been decommissioned after the war. It's like it was like they were not allowed to have that. They did not want to have that. They don't want to do anything. It was so gnarly, and they've touched on that in some of the other Godzilla movies, where sometimes Godzilla will be showing up and they'll sort of like go to the world platform and sort of ask for help because this is a pretty gnarly force they're up against. And it was like, I think it was the Americans and maybe Russians come out and they're just like, yeah, we have these new bombs that we'd be happy to try out on your Godzilla monster. It was just like, even 30 years after, the original movie and 30 years after World War II, there's still that lingering fear. It's just like, oh, they still want to test their technology of like mass destruction on our people. And Godzilla's always attacking like civilian areas for the most part. He does take out the nuclear power plants because sometimes he just feeds on radiation.
As one will, yeah.
As one will, right? And I love it. It's just like Godzilla's motivations. It just doesn't even matter. He's coming in. He'll usually just pick a straight line and just go for it.
Well, in this one, they treated him more, it was like animalistic. One of the scary things about Godzilla in this one was that they were talking like at a high level, oh, it's territorial. So it was like kind of animalistic, just like kind of gut instinct. It's like, okay, it's like, this is part of my territory now. I'm just going to protect it. But like, they really played up the fact that in this one, Godzilla was more, it was almost like a god and we were like ants. He wasn't coming at anybody specifically. He wasn't targeting. Yeah. He was just on a rampage through this place. And he wasn't like the news reporters on that, on the one building who were like, oh, Godzilla's right across the street from us and he's wreaking havoc and destruction. He just destroyed this historic theater. And he just walks by and his tail, he looks over at them kind of, or doesn't even look over at them maybe, but he walks by and they're like, oh, you think he's like, oh, he sees them. He's going to eat them or something. It's like, no, his tail just happens to hit their building and they collapse. He doesn't, the scary thing about this Godzilla, well, by the time of like when he attacks Tokyo, because I think we first see him and he's smaller, he's more like T-Rex size. By the time he gets to Tokyo, he's Godzilla size. So he's the size of a skyscraper, but he's just like, he doesn't care about individual people by that point. We're just ants to him. We're nothing to him. He'll unleash his atomic breath on like, oh yeah, like the big battleships that are attacking him, where it's almost like they're big enough to hit for him. It's like, oh, this is like another animal that's attacking me with their atomic breath, so I'm going to use it on them. But like, you have to be at least the size of a battleship for Godzilla to notice you in this one. I thought that like that was even in a sense more scary, where we don't even register on Godzilla's. We're not even on Godzilla's level. He'll like look around. It's like, it's just ants crawling around. It's like, I don't care. I'm just walking through here and like destroying these sandcastles.
Well, when like the main guy there, like his girlfriend there is blown away, the city's leveled. He manages to find like an alleyway, or he's pushed into the alleyway by his lady friend there, because they're not together.
Not a special lady. Yeah, just his lady friend.
He's like, I think he had plans to propose, but his shame that he carried on for so long like prevented him from doing that. So, you know, his special lady pushes him, sacrifices herself. She gets blown away. And like I can't remember, does he come out like screaming at Godzilla at some point? Like he's so distraught and angry, but Godzilla...
Well, it's in that scene after that his first atomic blast, which really shows you the power of, you know, truly atomic power of his breath. And then the main character comes out and he's screaming, and then Godzilla does his roar. So like he's screaming, but Godzilla doesn't even notice him. And Godzilla does his kind of classic roar into the heavens there. And so like you see that like there's that parallel between the two of them, and one of them is screaming for the loss of you know, his loved ones and the people around. I think it was like, what they say, 30,000 people were killed in that attack.
Insane.
Which was like, okay, they're not pulling. This is not like the Avengers where they're like, oh, we evacuated everybody off of Sokovia, no injuries, wink wink at the audience. It's like, no, there are real consequences for Godzilla's rampage through the streets. Yeah. So one guy's like crying out to the heavens in anguish, and then Godzilla's crying out to the heavens in like triumph, and like, you know, on top of the food chain kind of thing. It's like to see that comparison. And that's the scene where you see the black rain come down. I think historically what happened, it was like 1 or 2 hours after the atomic blast. There's a little bit truncated timeline, but that black rain was apparently I was looking it up afterwards because like it had to mean something. It was a direct reference to what happened after the nuclear blasts the nuclear bombs that were dropped in Japan, and the ash mixed with the rain clouds, and it literally rained this it was like black, like, I guess it had the consistency almost of tar. But it was also, they didn't play this up, but the original black rain after the nuclear blasts in Japan was actually, it was also radioactive as well. So if you were depending on where you were with the black rain, it may have had adverse effects on you as well. Here was more you know, symbolic, specifically evoking, you know, especially for a movie made by a Japanese studio, you know, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, like that's a huge part of their history, right? A huge part of, you know, the Allies' history as well, for different reasons. Obviously, we have a different sides to reckon with on that. You know,
without a doubt. But
to all of that imagery of like the nuclear blast and the fallout from the nuclear blast and that kind of devastation, like this was a movie that could only have been made by Japanese filmmakers, if that makes sense, because it was very much, I think you touched on the point before where it was talking about kind of, you know, the kind of survivor's guilt, or like that PTSD of having been in battle, and, you know, and you see that manifest differently in different cultures. And you see, this is specifically looking at people, mostly men, coming back from the war and having to bear those different burdens. You know, like there's a constant theme. This refrain is like, "Oh, my war is not over yet." The main character keeps saying, and his you know, special lady keeps asking, "Was like, oh, is your war? Are you done your war yet?" Right? Meaning, it's not so easy to come home and like all the death and the suffering that you faced, you bear that, right? We understand better trauma now, right? We didn't understand it as much at the time in the 1940s, but to see him kind of reckoning with that, and to see a specifically Japanese perspective of how they're reckoning with that, of having been the targets of those nuclear blasts, of having kamikaze fighters, people who were, you know, the government was training you specifically to sacrifice your life for king and country. I think they went into talking about this. I have to look at the actual historical you know, text to look into this further, but of their tanks not being armored properly, et cetera, of like essentially the Japanese imperial government at the time not putting any stock or really devaluing not just human life, but the lives of their own citizens as well in order to just like kind of maintain power, right? And so like dealing with all that burden and then all the imagery and all that, post-war PTSD from a very specific Japanese perspective. This, if you had given the same script to an American filmmaker, I don't think they would have been able to capture that essence. So like this is, it's an amazing like cultural artifact as well.
Well said. From that perspective of like, this is a weighty film. There's a lot of big topics being explored like that.
Yeah.
And not since the very first Godzilla have they, I felt like probably might be opinion that have they really like, that works for the movie, the very first round, and then it like sort of goes further and further from that point where like that commentary lessens over time. But it's like that first Godzilla, not since then has, until this movie has it really felt so significant. And you're like, that destruction is like Godzilla for a lot of people, I think. It's kind of fun to watch Godzilla just like trample through a city, blow things up with his atomic breath, and just destroy stuff. In some of the movies, they make sure it's like, a lot of people, there's lots of warning. We're getting people out of the way. Cities are evacuated. We can enjoy it on a certain level. But here, it's like you don't get that same level of joy. It's visually like impressive. Like it's a sight to behold.
Yeah.
But you, as an audience, as a viewer, you gotta reconcile what just happened right away, because they do the human characters and their arcs so well that it puts those destruction scenes into a greater context and more weight for yourself.
A human context, right? So you feel you're on the ground floor with those characters. You're feeling the weight of that destruction, as opposed to being an objective observer just watching, like Godzilla knock down some buildings. Like, to be on the ground with the character, feeling his grief is like, oh yeah, these are real human beings who died in the context of the movie, of course. But it's just like you feel the emotional weight in this. It was done like really, really well. It was done incredibly well.
So maybe lighten it up a little bit here. Not bad. This has been great discussion. How do you feel about the look of Godzilla in this movie? I mean, from a purely visual aspect here, I mean, for me, like, he was just so gnarly. Like, he really was a tour de force, and he was scary, right? And that's something that he doesn't necessarily get in a lot of his movies. He's not necessarily scary looking here, probably because of that greater context and the everything going on around it. It probably lends that to him. But here, like, he just the effects of him, everything looked so good.
Yeah. Also, I gotta say about this character, like, Godzilla is thick. Like, baby got back, man. This guy is like, he's got an ass that goes for mild. Like, I was looking at his legs. I think it was a throwback to the design of the original Godzilla, where there's a guy in the suit, and that was kind of cool as well. But it was obviously, because it was all CG, they could make him a little bit more kind of mobile and make it like, okay, he does have a bigger kind of bigger booty, but we can actually make him move. So it's like, okay, we can see how he's still a threat, right? But it's like, I like how he was like this. It was this unstoppable force. It wasn't like a zooming in super fast, like super agile. He was like, you get a sense of scale where he was like moving forward 1 foot at a time. It's like just like that inevitable march, right?
Yeah, I think they must have given him such a big booty and like making him so thick to really explain like why he's able to float so easily like in the water, because it looks like he's walking in the water when they're talking about him being like in water that's 1,500 meters deep. And it's just like, when you go back to the other Godzilla movies, it's a guy in a rubber suit, and he's literally standing in water, and he's always like just at like chest height or whatever. But it's like, no, Godzilla's in the ocean. Like, he's a seafaring creature. He can get around pretty easily, and he will float. Like, he does float, and he uses that to his advantage. Some of those scenes there where he was destroying like the naval, like the warship there, absolutely insane. Seeing his regeneration abilities when he first gets like one of the mines they recover, and he shoots it near his mouth, and it's just like half his face is blown up. You're like, oh, this Godzilla can be damaged.
Yeah, I was expecting it to like, not doing anything to him, but then when it comes up and it's like half his face is blown apart, I was like, man, they can actually do something to it. When he regenerates, though, it's like it's scar tissue. You see, like he doesn't regenerate perfectly. It was so
and it
cool.
makes so much sense when they do that. And you're like, okay, he can regenerate, but it's like it gives you that glimmer of hope that if they throw enough conventional firepower at this guy, they might be able to damage Godzilla and actually take him out. And of course, the story of the movie doesn't allow that because they're basically being demilitarized here, right? And it's just like they don't have the support of a giant military. And they haven't developed like the laser weapons that they get later on in some of the 70s Godzilla films.
Or the magic jets from like Godzilla versus Kong. They just jumped ahead from modern technology like 50 years.
Yeah. Well, they definitely get, I always thought that was like a throwback to Godzilla 85 because they have like this super jet that like can withstand and store the power of his atomic breath when it's attacked.
What?
And like kind of shoot it back at him. There's a lot of fantastical sci-fi in Godzilla, but stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't need to. I mean, it's a giant monster movie.
You had my attention, but now you have my curiosity.
Right? There's a lot of funny things. I found in the adjacent movies, there's a lot of very advanced spaceships and submarines. It was like they were obsessed with super powerful submarines for a little while. They could do anything they wanted. And submarines that could fly out of the water and turn into jets in the air and shoot mega lasers at things. But yeah, this one, it felt pretty grounded and really, really satisfying. The ending there, did you think he was actually like gone? Like some of the ending events there where he does end up flying into Godzilla's mouth with a big bomb, blows up his head, right? It's just like, I thought for sure like, he might have been a goner there.
This is like the scene, like this whole ending sequence. There was one scene when he was flying into battle against Godzilla and it was playing that. There's like simple 3 notes. And it was so dramatic and so powerful. Like he fixed this up, like the mechanic, like it was great too. Like the main character there, Shikishima, who had not only he was a kamikaze pilot who had diverted to this island, and there was a mechanic there. It was essentially like almost like a resupply base. We get resupplied. You get your plane repaired, and you can go on and do whatever you're going to do in the war. But there, he stops there. Godzilla attacks, and he has another opportunity. He runs to his plane. He's got the 20mm guns pointed at Godzilla's head at one point because Godzilla comes into view when Godzilla's just like a baby because he's only T-Rex size at that time. Yeah. And he doesn't take the shots, and like he freezes up or he's scared, and like everybody except for the one main mechanic die. But he specifically goes to get that mechanic to fix the plane so he can fly, and and essentially he's like, his plan is like, the scientist has his plan to like, we're going to use whatever that chemical is to cause him to sink to the bottom, to like hopefully crush him, and if not, we'll also attach the inflatable pads to bring him up and hopefully give him the bend, so hopefully the decompression will kill him. Which is like, I thought it was like, that's such a cool idea, instead of just like, let's throw a bunch more bombs and artillery at him. It was like, no, they were actually like, we think of like, we don't have bombs and artillery. What can we do? Oh, the power of the ocean to either crush him or decompress him or give him the bends. Like, oh man, this is so cool. This is such a cool idea.
And to me, it was a throwback to the very first Godzilla, where they destroyed Godzilla using what they call the oxygen destroyer, where the scientist is able to create something that basically eliminates the oxygen inside water. And when they use it like to test on a couple fish in a fish tank, it just like obliterates them to the point where they're a skeleton. And that's what they do. They lure Godzilla out into the middle of the ocean and blow up the stuff. And it looks visually the same as these Freon tanks exploding around him to sink him. Is that just the water starts bubbling up and forces him to sink down because there's no more oxygen.
Freon.
And it basically, I mean, they're successful. Spoiler alert for the original Godzilla. It's successful. Godzilla is turned into a skeleton. And it's questionable afterwards if that very first Godzilla, I mean, he never comes back. There's more Godzillas out there, right? Later on in the movies. But this one, bring him down to the bottom. Like, I loved it. Where it's just like 1,500 meters. That's enough to like crush everything. If it's not, bring him back up to the surface really quickly. You'll get the bends. It'll decompress or whatever. And it's just like, it should be a gnarly end for him.
And they foreshadowed it with the fish who would always precede Godzilla coming. It's like, oh, the fish were being forced up so fast that they're being turned inside out, right? It's like, okay, it was all foreshadowed as well. But yeah, that final battle with Shikishima, where he essentially was like trying to get redemption for like, oh, I was a coward. I didn't have what it took to go through with the kamikaze mission. I didn't have what it took to shoot Godzilla, and that kind of that guilt parallels like kind of that after the war when he comes home and his neighbor says like, oh, if you would have done your duty, we could have won the war, right?
Yeah.
It's like, so he feels like guilt. It's like, oh, if I would have shot Godzilla, we could have won this battle before it started, which, knowing what we know about Godzilla in that movie now, is dubious, but he still feels that guilt, right? And again, it's like that reckoning of like, we know now, of course, if he had been successful, he wouldn't have won the war, right? But it's like that again, trying to reconcile, the post war, whether your side won or lost, you have to reconcile with how you came in that position, right? So for him to, you think that, he's setting up for the kamikaze mission where he's gonna finish his kamikaze mission, go sacrifice himself, kill Godzilla. If the plan with the Freon and everything doesn't work, he still, as a last resort, he can still fly his plane with the bomb into Godzilla's mouth. But then it ties in perfectly. He saves himself. You see the mechanic before he launches off. He's telling him like, this, here are the upgrades I made. But then it kind of pans out, and he's like, there's one more thing I got to tell you. And he points to something. I kind of knew that it was an ejection switch. So, but when the moment hit, when you realize like, because the way they film it, you show him flying in is like, oh, but you see him, then and they look, his parachute is like, and he lived, right? And it's like, it's still, even though you kind of knew it was coming, it's like you still like breathe that sigh of relief. It's like, okay, especially with, the scientist there. I can't remember the dude's name with the great hair, but like when they're prepping for the battle the night before, and he's like, go home to your families, right? We need to be ready by 0800 because we're estimating that Godzilla's going to be here by 1100. And then one of the guys says, oh, you mean like go home to spend with our families, to prepare, i.e. prepare to die, right? Because we're probably going to die. And he's like, no, you know what? Like, that's when he goes into that speech about like, no, for still like the Japanese government, they treated us as expendable. They didn't armor the tanks properly. They had kamikaze fighters where literally our people were being sacrificed as weapons. Like, no, go home and spend time with your family, because to remind yourself what's worth living for. Like, we're going to have a mission where no one is going to sacrifice themselves and no one's going to die because we value human life now, right? It's like, we're going to take the opposite approach of the Japanese imperialist government. It was such a moving speech, such a moving sentiment. And then to have like this guy feel like, oh, I have to kill myself. I have to complete my kamikaze mission. Like, Shikishima feels like he has to complete his mission. He felt like he shouldn't have come home from the war. He feels like survivor's guilt where he should have died in his mission. But then to have him choose life, right? He could have not pulled the eject button at the end, right?
Yeah.
He could have sacrificed himself needlessly, but just to, to satisfy the ghosts of the people that died that he felt guilt for. But in the end, he chooses life, and it's such. I thought that was such a powerful message, combined with, all the storytelling elements where they choose life. I don't think they did lose anybody in the mission, right? Where they were fighting, instead of being willing to sacrifice your life for the missions, like, we're going to fight to live, and we're going to fight for each other to save as many lives, as opposed to, we're going to put value in human life as opposed to devaluing human life. And that's how we're going to win. And I thought, it's like, A, what a powerful message, and B, it just was, that theme was woven in, and that message was woven in so perfectly with the events of the movie that I can't remember. There was one scene right at the end where it was like complete silence. I think was it right before he flew his plane in?
Oh, possibly, yeah.
There's that one scene that's complete silence, and it's like, it worked so well. And I was just like feeling like these emotions, like you were feeling the excitement and the adrenaline pumping, but then like the emotions, like, oh, is his adoptive daughter going to be an orphan now because the mother, we didn't know she didn't actually die. We saw her get taken away in the blast. Turns out she's alive at the end. Is he going to to satisfy his own guilt? Is he going to leave another orphan behind, or is he able to kind of work through the demons of his past and work through kind of his PTSD? And it's such an emotional moment as well as an exciting moment. Like, it's the emotion tied to the action, tied to the drama, and it's all woven so well, the themes and the action and the characters. And it's just like this perfect moment. So when that bomb goes off, you see him, he's alive, bomb goes off, like Godzilla was powering up to fire his beam again, his atomic breath, or his heat ray rather. and his head blows up, and then you see like the energy that he's stored up for the heat rates is like just shooting out his body, and his body disintegrates and crumbles around him. It was like, oh my god,
Beautiful.
it was so great, and it like made sense in the context of the movie how these big destroyers with their giant guns couldn't destroy him, but like this perfect set of circumstances where they weakened him by sinking him to the bottom of the ocean, bringing him back up again, and then he's about to power up. In the middle of powering up, he gets blown up, and so that energy has to dissipate. It's like, oh, this everything made like contextually in the context of the story and the world, it made perfect sense as well. It's like everything was just chef's kiss, right? It was perfect. It was beautiful.
I think he summed it up pretty well there. It was just like everything about this movie just works so perfectly. Even when he goes back to see his future wife, Noriko, discovering she's still alive, she's in the hospital, and then like one of the last scenes is kind of like, I think they're hugging and the camera pans down to her neck, and it's like there's this like blackness in her veins.
Okay, I thought
and
so.
And it's like, that harkens back to what you said earlier, where it's like that black ash, like that's falling from the sky, had greater effects to the people who survived later on from the atomic blast. Just like that is probably exactly where she got this, whatever it's going to be, for a leaving the door open for the inevitable sequel. Something bad will possibly happen to her, or she'll turn into a superhero as well, which can happen in Godzilla movies too.
Really?
But I mean, everything about it was just perfect. I don't think I could add anything else to the movie there.
That was one of my only gripes with the film, is I thought they had fridged Noriko. For people listening, when you're fridging a character, it typically refers to a female character. Fridging a character means to kill off a female character or have a female character suffer in order to advance the character of a male character. I think there was a specific movie where literally like a female character, kind of trigger warning here, maybe got like chopped up and killed and put in the fridge. So like they kind of did at the end where they kind of showed as like, oh, she's still alive, but that was my only kind of one gripe with the film, is how they kind of used the female characters to, fake out death to motivate the main male character. They at the end they showed that she wasn't quite dead, or not dead at all. She's in the Princess Bride, they would say, oh, she's not dead, she's just mostly dead. But that I think that was like literally my only gripe with the movie, was like how they almost fridged the female character to motivate the male character. But then I think that's literally the only negative I have about the film. Like, other than that, it was like, I've been struggling to think of anything negative, because like, it can't be this great, right? It can't be.
It has no right being this great, but it is literally this great. Absolutely astounding. Just a couple things I like, and this happens in a lot of Godzilla movies. Somebody will see Godzilla, they'll run out, they'll tell people, it's just like, oh my God, there's this giant monster, Godzilla's here. And people are like, they don't not believe the character, right? Because and the same thing happens here. He runs into Godzilla in his tinier T-Rex form on that island earlier in the movie, and only one other guy survives to possibly tell the tale. And they don't really talk about it too much. And he's telling his buddies on the boat, it's just like, yeah, there's this giant monster, and I think that's what it is. And they call them Godzilla, and the other people aren't making fun of them. They don't go into immediate disbelief mode. They're just like, oh my God, if that's true, like, we have no reason not to believe you because you're an honest person. It was just like, this is really bad for people, right?
It was refreshing that they didn't waste a bunch of time. I was like, oh, we don't believe this guy. And then it's like the kind of Cassandra syndrome, where it's like you're running around and nobody believes you. It was great. They didn't waste time on that nonsense. It's like, they were kind of dubious. It's like, really, there's a giant monster? It's like, okay, we haven't seen it, but what? We'll prepare, because like, I think that speaks to the mentality. Maybe it's that Japanese point of view, right? It's like, until we got 2 nuclear bombs dropped on us, we wouldn't have believed they existed either. So maybe there's like a more willingness. Oh, that's
a good point.
This dude is like saying like, oh yeah, something really bad is coming. I've seen it with my own eyes. And they're like, they've just been nuked twice by weapons that they couldn't possibly have, they didn't even believe existed or know existed. It's like, you know what? It makes sense probably from the Japanese storytelling point of view, where it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna believe this guy just in case it turns out to be true. We're not gonna take any chances anymore. It's like, yeah, we're gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. It's like there very well could be a giant dinosaur like monster. It's like let's get those recovered mines ready just in case, right?
Unbelievable. So we could get into our ratings now. You have anything else to add before we do?
No, I think that was it. I think we touched on kind of all the major kind of plot points, all the major themes. We could talk more about this. I mean, what was that island? Was it Odo Island? I think the original
I think so,
sequence.
yeah.
Like every sequence in here could be an episode unto itself. It was just like everything was so, there was so much going on, plot wise, character wise, thematically, and also I really appreciated, especially after watching all the American versions recently of like the MonsterVerse of Godzilla and Godzilla versus Kong and all this. Finally, we get, again, just like Shin Godzilla, another well-lit movie where I can fully see Godzilla. I can see exactly what's going on. It's not dark, and all the action's not obscured by smoke or snow or whatever else it is. I was like the American Hollywood, take note. You can actually show your monster in broad daylight, and he's still scary as all hell, right?
Well, I have to talk about this for a second because the 2014 American Godzilla, directed by Gareth Edwards, we recently talked about the creator.
Oh, that was the worst offender, man.
I still think it's a good movie, and there's some stat out there where Godzilla appears on screen more in that movie than most of the Godzilla movies that came previous to it, which seems astounding because that's one of the biggest complaints of the movie is that we barely get to see Godzilla. But I hate to break it to you, but a lot of the older Japanese movies are like that, where they lead up. If a movie's 90 minutes long, it's an hour lead up with human characters and one, possibly two Godzilla encounters with a 20 or 30 minute, here's the payoff though, 20-minute battle royales with giant monsters at the end, right? Which we sort of get in that Godzilla movie, but the effects specifically called out in that 2014 for being too dark. And I think they actually remastered the movie on Blu-ray after the initial release to brighten it up a little bit so people could actually see what the heck is going on
so
screen here.
To be clear, my complaint wasn't how much screen time Godzilla had in the 2014 version or any of the MonsterVerse versions. My complaint was like when he did have screen time, I could barely see what was going on because it was either blurry or it was obscured. Yeah. It was dark. It was really poorly lit, or it was like obscured by smoke or haze or something. So you'd see technically Godzilla, but you'd see him through like a haze in the middle of the night. So I could see him technically, but not really. So that was my complaint, not about the amount of screen time from Godzilla on those MonsterVerse movies, but the quality of the Godzilla shown in the movies.
Yeah. And that was one of the things for Godzilla King of the Monsters, which I think was the second American one. They actually just like amped up the amount of on-screen monsters as a direct like response to people complaining about how little Godzilla there was. And you sacrifice even more of the actual drama and human characters that actually drive these movies forward.
And then again, they were in the first fight of that movie, Godzilla King of the Monsters, big snowstorm. There was monsters like blurry. There's like blurry stuff behind snow and smoke. Like they were technically on screen, and I couldn't see a thing that was happening. So it was like, they're taking the wrong message away from the feedback.
Yeah. And there's one quote from Gareth Edwards after watching Godzilla Minus Zero, where he said,
Minus One.
This minus one. Yes, sorry, minus zero. Have I been calling it minus zero this entire time?
Yes, and I just didn't correct you until now. No, this is the first time.
I'll just go back and re-edit all the zeros into ones. I'm sure it'll sound seamless.
I remember watching Godzilla Minus One in theaters. I really loved Godzilla Minus One.
Oh, man. So Gareth Edwards has been quoted as saying, "This is what a Godzilla movie should be." And he was apparently jealous of this film after his outing in the Godzilla universe there, but I just thought it's an interesting quote, and I think this movie took a lot of people by surprise.
Yeah,
that Godzilla's kind of been relegated to maybe more of the campy, guy in a suit stomping through miniatures, kind of, I don't want to say like put down, but kind of in that B movie territory for so long. And something like this, Shin Godzilla was really awesome.
Yes,
and then this comes out, and this is in my mind even better. I mean, you can't discount Godzilla. It's just really good stuff. We should talk about ratings, I guess.
I guess.
And so we use the 0 to 5-star scale with a possible like on that to sort of mirror our letterbox rating platform. I have a feeling. Well, I'm kind of interested to see where you land. Like, I don't want to take a full guess here, but what's your rating on this?
Man, before we started talking, I was thinking like somewhere in the range of 4.5 to 5 stars, but I think I'm gonna have to settle on 5 stars. Like after talking about this, I'm just like I'm always dubious the first time I watch a movie. It's like, oh, I'm trying to be careful and like hold back excitement, enthusiasm, because usually it's like the cult of the new, right? It's like that it's a new big shiny thing, and it's only been less than 24 hours since I've seen the movie for the first time. But then talking to you right now, I'm just like, I can't think of anything that should bring this down. I'm gonna have to give this like a 5 out of 5. Like this was just an all around great movie. How about you? What was your rating on this?
It was a straight 5 from the get-go.
Nice.
Again,
nice.
I do struggle with that idea of giving a movie 5 stars right off the first viewing, but I think I'm trying to come away from that idea and like be a little more brave giving that 5 stars. We do have in our system the like, which I do hold back for future viewings.
Yeah.
I don't think I really give, except maybe 1 or 2 movies, the like immediately. That being said, like, this is 5 stars, and I loved it. I loved it every second of it. I was tempted to go back to the theater to see it again because
I get it.
We've been spoiled for the past couple of years in terms of turnaround time for like the digital release of it, like a Blu-ray release. And they, when I'm Googling or searching how long it's going to be before Minus One hits, media and whatnot, they're saying it could be 6 or more months based on previous history with like Shin Godzilla took almost a full year to come out. And it's because of all the rights issues, licensing, all this stuff. It's a foreign film, it's Japanese. So getting it onto like US, North American streaming services is there's more involved in doing that. Getting it released on physical media, I think I'd look forward. I mean, it's a day one purchase for me.
Oh yeah, 100%.
But it sounds like it could be a ways away. So I'm thinking, it's still playing in theaters right now. I might actually have to go out and see this again because it was just amazing.
Movie so nice, you had to see it twice in theaters. You want to see one movie in theaters? Go see Godzilla Minus One. It was just all around a great experience. I went to see this with my son, who is 13. I definitely didn't forget my son's age. So people concerned about subtitles or anything, having to read subtitles, because this is, when it was playing here, it was the original Japanese with English subtitles. Yeah. And like I told my son like this is what it's going to be. He was able to follow along, no issues. So if you're ever worried about trying to follow along and read subtitles on a, I'll say foreign language film, essentially like any film that's not non-English for our English speaking listeners, you can do it. My 13-year-old son can do it.
Yeah.
Not discounting people who actually do have like dyslexia. If you don't have dyslexia, you should be able to see any movie with subtitles, no problem. So I don't think it's a barrier to entry for this movie at all.
We want to talk about how the movie's been received around the world. Well, I shouldn't say around the world. These are North American sites, basically Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb. They have worldwide appeal, but they're mostly North American focused. What do you think the Rotten Tomatoes critic rating is for Godzilla Minus One?
I'm seeing something now. It's coming to me. Yes, a 92?
98%.
Oh my God. 98%? Wow.
Audience rating, I'm just going to spoil it. It's also at 98% audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
That's amazing. It definitely deserves this. 100%.
Pretty astounding. IMDb, they use the 10 point scale for a score out of 10. And what do you think its average amongst its users is?
Well, let's go 8.7.
Pretty close. It's an 8.5 right now.
Okay.
And finally, where you can find us on Letterboxd, its users average is
4.2.
Spot on.
Oh yeah,
4.2.
nice.
I think there was some shock and maybe some dubiousness about a week or two after this movie released. This was actually into the Letterboxd top 250 narrative movies.
Okay.
I can't remember. I think it's spot number 208 as of this recording. To get a recent movie into the top 250 is maybe a bit of a stretch, but the numbers don't lie. 4.2 average. 98% Rotten Tomato critics audience. Like, people are loving this movie.
It's great to see. It's great to see. Like, this is the kind of movie. I don't know if it's going to be up for any Oscars in terms of like foreign films. It should be up for Best Picture, like 100%. It's like, we'll see. We'll see if that actually happens. We'll see what how the. I don't put that much stock in awards. Awards in the industry anymore. But I really do hope that this gets, the accolades it deserves, if only to boost that, boost people's knowledge and get more people, increase that audience. Because like, these are the people talking about, originality. And even though this is, yes, it's part of a long running franchise, they've, they had the gumption or the chutzpah to kind of go back to the drawing board, reinvent the character again. Then, like, the writers, the studio, they weren't afraid to, kind of reinvent and, use the character to tell a story, instead of just trying to build into the franchise. Like, I don't even think. I think you could maybe argue that, Godzilla Minus One and Shin Godzilla are in the same continuity. Kind of I won't spoil anything for Shin Godzilla, but like, it could potentially be in the same continuity, but that doesn't have to be, right? I almost, if they were going to take this approach to storytelling with Godzilla and just like give directors and writers the freedom to tell standalone stories using the character, pick, what is Godzilla going to represent in this one? Like, in this case, Godzilla represents like, the threat of nuclear war. It represents, veterans' guilt and PTSD after coming home from war. It has all these different, Godzilla has all these different meanings. So to take him, put him in a new context, him or her, it's not revealed whether it's a boy or a girl. So it could be, it's non-gender specific. So, depending on how you like your giant murder lizards, but like, I would love to see them continue. Don't worry about continuity, like that. Just tell good stories using this character, and I think I'd be perfectly happy seeing just like, set him in the future, set him in present day, but like do something interesting and use it to tell a story and explore those ideas. Like, they were on the right track with this movie.
Well said. And that's a wrap on another episode. As always, we appreciate you hanging out with us today and taking the time to listen to our podcast. We have a lot of fun putting these together and hope that you get some enjoyment out of them as well. You can find us online over at realfilmchronicles.com, where we have not just a repository of podcast episodes, but many of our written reviews as well. If you're up to it, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram as well. All the links should be within the show notes here. So until next time, take care of yourself and others, and be sure to enjoy your film journey.